There are moments that seem so small, yet have the power to change your entire life. I once believed I had it all, a devoted husband, a stable life, peaceful evenings spent side by side. But then, a single accidental message shattered everything I thought I knew. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's my journey, from devastation and heartbreak to strength and finding myself again. If you have ever loved, trusted, and fallen apart, this story is for you. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the most genuine stories deserve to be heard. I still remember exactly when my world began to crack, not with a loud bang, but with a tiny sound, the familiar ping of Ryan's phone while he was showering. I was never the type to check my husband's phone. 15 years together had built what I thought was unshakable trust. But that night, something felt wrong. Ryan's phone lit up on the dresser. A message from Sophie popped up. Reservation confirmed at Aria, Friday 8 p.m. She'll love the private booth. Something primal inside me surged up, an instinct I couldn't suppress. I picked up the phone with trembling hands and entered the password, our anniversary date. The screen unlocked. And in front of me was not just a single message, but an entire hidden world, photos, conversations, plans for the future between Ryan and Sophie Lane, a colleague from his firm. 15 years of life turned out to be nothing but an elaborate act. I sat there for what felt like forever, still holding Ryan's phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know how long I stayed frozen, a few minutes, maybe an eternity, before finally placing the phone back exactly where it had been, forcing myself to breathe. Ryan was still in the bathroom, unaware that the life we had built together was crumbling just outside the door. That night, I lay next to him, our backs turned away, just like we had been for months. He fell asleep quickly, breathing peacefully, while I lay wide awake, crushed under the weight of betrayal. I had trusted him with my whole heart. And he had trampled it with soft, beautiful lies. At first, I thought I would do what people do in movies and books, confront him, cry, scream. But the longer I thought about it, the more I realized Ryan was a lawyer. He knew how to twist words, to gaslight, to turn the truth inside out. If I confronted him impulsively, I would only give him a chance to spin more lies and paint me as hysterical. No. I needed another way. A way he couldn't talk his way out of. A way the betrayal would be exposed, raw, undeniable, with no escape. And the idea crystallized, Arya. The restaurant Ryan had reserved for his business dinner that Friday. If he wanted a romantic evening with his mistress, I would give him that dinner, with an unexpected guest. The next morning, I called Arya, keeping my voice casual. I requested a table near the private booths, explaining that I might be joining colleagues later. The host was accommodating, assuring me he could position my table perfectly, close enough to see, close enough to hear. Next, I needed to reach out to Daniel Lane, Sophie's husband. A direct phone call would be too emotional, too risky. I needed it to look natural. As a university economics professor, I emailed Daniel an entirely legitimate invitation, asking him to join our upcoming executive lecture series to share his business experience with students. I casually mentioned that we could meet Friday night over dinner at Arya if that fit his schedule. Within hours, Daniel replied. He was free, and excited to meet. I closed my laptop and sat silently at the kitchen counter, my fingers wrapped tightly around a mug of cold coffee. Part of me still couldn't believe I was doing this. Just days ago, I had been planning a special anniversary trip. Now, I was planning the final act of my marriage. The grief rose like a tidal wave, but then, solidified into something colder. Stronger. It was time to stop hoping. Stop explaining away the signs. Stop lying to myself. For the next 3 days, I moved through our home like a ghost. Ryan didn't notice a thing. He still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still texted that he had late meetings, still smiled and spoke hollow words as if nothing was wrong. But now, I watched him with new eyes. The secretive glances at his phone. The hushed conversations in another room. The subtle avoidance when I asked about his plans. I used to think I was lucky. Now I saw I had been clinging to an illusion. And I vowed, Friday night, that illusion would shatter. Not in tears, not in screaming. But with the cold, hard light of truth. Friday night, I stood before the mirror for a long time. I chose a simple, elegant black dress, nothing flashy, nothing over the top, just enough to remind myself, I was still here. Strong, dignified, and worthy. I put on pearl earrings, the ones Ryan had given me for our 10th anniversary, sparkling softly under the lights. A small, bitter irony. I applied red lipstick, the color Ryan once said was too bold for a wife. Tonight, I wore everything he once wanted me to hide. I arrived at Arya 30 minutes early. The maitre d' recognized me from the phone call and led me to my table, perfectly positioned with a clear view of the private booth Ryan had reserved. I sat down and ordered a martini. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the glass, but my gaze remained steady, locked on the entrance. I had waited long enough for this moment. 15 minutes later, Ryan arrived. He looked polished in the suit I had once picked out for him for an important promotion. Wearing his best charming smile, he followed the hostess to his booth. My heart clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was why I was here. Not to fall apart. Soon after, Sophie Lane walked in. If anyone else had seen her that night, they might have mistaken her for a celebrity, young, radiant, effortlessly magnetic. She wore a fitted red dress, the kind you wear when you want everyone to notice you. Ryan immediately stood to greet her, his face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in years. He kissed her hand, pulled out her chair, and they leaned into each other, whispering and laughing as if they were the only two people in the world. I clenched my martini glass tighter, fighting back the sting of tears. Then, Daniel Lane entered. He was dressed more casually than Ryan, but he had the solid, grounded presence of a man confident in himself. When he spotted me, I stood to greet him with a polite smile. "Emily Carter?" he asked, extending his hand. "Yes." "So nice to meet you, Daniel," I replied. We sat down, pretending to focus on professional small talk. But my eyes kept flicking over to the booth. Ryan was pouring wine, Sophie laughing freely, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Daniel, completely unaware, spoke about his architecture projects, his passion for building sustainable communities. And my heart ached, because I knew he, too, was living inside a lie. About 30 minutes in, Sophie excused herself to the restroom. This was my moment. "Excuse me a second," I told Daniel, standing up. I crossed the dining room, my heart pounding in my ears. And there, in the middle of the room, I came face to face with Sophie Lane. She recognized me instantly. Her bright blue eyes widened in horror, her face turned pale. "Emily," she stammered. "That's right," I said calmly. "I'm Emily Carter. And over there," I tilted my head toward Daniel, "is your husband." She flinched, her mouth opening and closing helplessly. I can explain," she whispered. "No need," I cut her off. "The truth is already loud and clear." My gaze never wavered. Across the room, I saw Ryan notice our interaction. He stood abruptly, panic flashing across his face. Slowly, I returned to the table and gently touched Daniel's arm. "Daniel," I said evenly. "I think you should meet your wife." Confused, he followed my line of sight and saw Sophie, frozen in place, her guilt obvious for all to see. The devastation on Daniel's face was like a physical blow. I heard him exhale sharply, as if the air had been knocked out of him. Ryan rushed toward me, his voice frantic. "Emily, please, I can explain." I turned to him, smiling coldly. "Perfect," I said. "We have all evening to hear you and Sophie explain everything." The restaurant manager, sensing the rising tension, quickly suggested moving us to a private room for a more comfortable conversation. I nodded. We walked past the curious stares of other diners, strangers who surely wondered if they had just witnessed the unfolding of a tragedy. The four of us, Ryan, Daniel, Sophie, and I, sat around a small round table in the private dining room. No one spoke at first. No one dared to. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "You have to believe me," he said desperately, "this isn't what it looks like." I let out a hollow laugh, void of any humor. "Really, Ryan? Then why don't you go ahead and explain it to us? The texts, the photos, the weekend getaways, all just a big misunderstanding?" He faltered, unable to answer. I turned to Sophie, her eyes red and swollen. "And you, Sophie? Do you have a version of the story that somehow makes sense?" She lowered her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel clenched his fists under the table, visibly struggling to keep his composure. "How long?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "Around a year," Ryan admitted, looking down in shame. A year. A full year of lies, deception, and betrayal, lived right under the same roof I had believed was my safe place. I stood up, reached into my bag, and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a hotel room key. I placed it calmly in front of Ryan. "I've booked a room at the Grand Meridian," I said, my voice steady. "I'll be staying there tonight. By the time I return home Monday, I expect you to be gone." Ryan's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're kicking me out?" he gasped. "No, Ryan. You kicked yourself out the moment you chose to destroy what we built," I replied coldly. "I'm just making it official." Daniel stared at Sophie as if seeing her for the first time, and realizing he didn't know her at all. That look, the silent ending, was somehow more devastating than any shouting could have been. Sophie sobbed openly now, reaching out for Daniel, but he recoiled, stepping back. "There's nothing more to say," Daniel said, standing up. "We'll talk later. Or maybe we won't." He turned to me, his gaze full of pain but also gratitude. "Thank you, Emily," he said quietly. "For telling me the truth. No matter how much it hurts, I'm grateful." I nodded, too choked up to speak. Daniel left the room first. I followed shortly after, leaving Ryan and Sophie behind in a room heavy with shame. I walked out of Arya with my head held high. And when the door closed behind me, I knew a chapter of my life had ended for good. At the hotel, I checked into my room and finally allowed myself to fall apart. I cried, not just for losing Ryan, but for losing the illusion, the naive belief that we had once shared something unbreakable. That night, I barely slept. I sat by the window, staring out over the glittering city lights, thinking about my future, a future without Ryan by my side. The next morning, I received a text from Daniel. "Just wanted to make sure you're okay. If you need a friend, I'm here." I smiled weakly. A simple gesture. A genuine one. Maybe, just maybe, something new could grow out of all this pain. Not immediately. But eventually. I typed back. "Thank you. I hope we both find what we truly deserve." And then I put down my phone, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. Today was the first day of my new life. The weeks that followed passed by in a blur. Ryan and I began the divorce proceedings, cold, practical, stripped of any lingering tears or desperate apologies. He tried, of course. Tried with promises, with hollow regrets, but I had already seen too clearly who he truly was. This wasn't a single moment of weakness. It was a series of conscious, repeated choices. Ryan moved out, carrying his excuses and belated guilt with him. Sophie, from what I heard, left town shortly after, unable to face the fallout in a community that once admired her. And me? I remained, alone in a house that had once been filled with memories. I began learning how to fill the silence with freedom. I bought new sheets. I rearranged the living room. I added plants, small, green bursts of life Ryan used to complain were too much upkeep. Every tiny change, every deliberate choice was a way of reclaiming my space. My life. Daniel and I kept in touch, at first, exchanging texts filled with raw hurt. But gradually, our conversations deepened. Coffee meetings turned into long, meandering evening talks, about dreams abandoned, about futures tentatively taking shape, about trust slowly being rebuilt. We weren't rushing. We weren't trying to cover our pain with each other. We were simply two people, walking side by side, healing together. One evening, as we walked along the riverfront, Daniel gently took my hand. No rush. No expectation. Just a simple, steady touch, real, honest. I looked up at the night sky, at the stars twinkling above, and realized something. Sometimes you have to lose everything, to truly find yourself. And sometimes, out of the most painful wreckage, something beautiful can finally bloom. I smiled, feeling a new kind of strength settle into my bones. I took another step forward, not into the past, not into fear, but into my own future. Because for the first time in a very long time, I knew this journey ahead was truly mine to own.